I'd also like to welcome those representatives of the University and College Union who are also on strike today and are joining us. My name is Christine Raftery and I'm one of the local NUT officers here in Leeds. I know that it isn't an easy decision for a teacher to decide to strike, but we feel that we have no alternative to this action because the government is just not listening to the teachers' concerns. We're here today to protest against the government's recent education white paper and the continuing underfunding of the state education service. We're here today to defend the state education service for our children and for our young people. The widespread opposition to the government white paper from across all the political parties and others has forced a tactical retreat by the Secretary of State for Education, Nicky Morgan, on her initial proposal that all schools must become academies by 2022. However, the tactics may have changed, but the intention remains the same. She just intends to achieve this via a different route. If this succeeds, it will mean a bonfire of nationally agreed pay and conditions, with an end to sick pay, maternity pay, notice periods, salary structure, and any restrictions on teaching hours and working days that we have at present and worked so hard to obtain. None of these will be determined by national agreements, but by individual, unelected boards of multi-academy trusts. Meanwhile, schools and local authorities continue to face the challenge of continuing to deliver high-quality education in the face of dramatic cuts to school funding. The local authority family of maintained schools is the most democratic and accountable system for ensuring high-quality, inclusive and comprehensive education. Local authorities do not control schools, they support schools. The government spending cuts will mean larger class sizes, less individual attention for children, fewer subject choices for the children, and teachers and support staff being cut or not replaced. Now that's just a taster of what's to come, because we have many speakers here today who are going to spell out in detail what that's going to mean for us. The first person I'd like to call to speak to you this morning is Patrick Murphy. Patrick Murphy is the NUT Divisional Secretary for Leeds and the National Executive Member for the Yorkshire Midland region. Will you all put your hands together and welcome Patrick, please?
Hey!
Thanks so much for what you've done today. Some people here have come out on strike in a school where everything was solid. Some people have come out in a strike where things were more split. And I've just spoken to someone who was the only person who struck in her school. And I'd like to give a big, big thanks to you. The public stage and the public debate in this country over the last 4 to 6 months, whatever you think of either side of the argument, has been dominated by people who wanted to shout the slogan, "We want our country back." Today is the day that teachers take to the public stage, grab the microphone to say, "We want our schools back." We want our professionalism back, and we want our national terms and conditions back for all teachers in all state-funded schools, whether they're academies or maintained schools. Now, it's part of my job, as Christine said, to try and explain what the strike is about from the NUT's point of view. And that's going to mean a certain amount of detail. But I don't want to forget one general thing. This strike is about the quality and the fairness of the education system that serves our children. This strike is in the interests of children. It's a strike that's about, it's action and it's part of a campaign that's about making sure that children have in front of them motivated, ambitious, inspirational teachers that want to stay in the profession and don't want to leave it. That's what this dispute's really about. some detail. The detail is about funding, which we were chanting about just now and on the streets, and about the impact of academies. And I'm going to talk about both those things for a little while, but I want to just make one thing clear right from the start. No aspect of this is against anybody who works at an academy. No aspect of this is against academies as the schools who serve the children they serve every day. It's about the way our education system is framed, and not about people in individual schools. Now, in terms of funding, the union's been saying, the NUT's been saying, that schools face cuts of between 9 and 14% in their overall spending in the next 3 years. In the budget, and again this morning on the radio for those of you listening, Nicky Morgan kept saying that education spending would be protected at the current level. It's very easy to bamboozle people who listen to radio programmes, and that's the only time they ever hear of education. But protected at the current level means cut. It means frozen, because it means it doesn't rise with inflation. They are saying they will keep the same amount of money, the same cash amount of money per pupil in the next 3 years. But that is a cut of about 5% in real terms because it does not go up with inflation. And schools are feeling the pinch on that. I'll explain some of the effects of that in a minute. But that's not the only cut. Pension contributions, our pension contributions have gone up. So have your employers, the amount they pay into your pension, that's also gone up. Our national insurance contributions have gone up. So have the employers, which is the schools. And staffing is the biggest cost of a school. And that's where we get this figure of 9 to 14% spending cuts in the next 3 years. And it isn't just the NUT that are saying it. In Leeds last year, a body called the Schools Forum, which some of you will know about, but it's made up of a representative body of the heads and governors in Leeds, wrote a letter to the Secretary of State about the impact of school funding cuts on Leeds schools. And I'll just read you a couple of extracts from it. They said, in 2015 to 16, these cuts would lead to Leeds schools having a funding shortfall of 5.3 million, which is the equivalent of 130 teaching posts in 1 year. When the full effect is felt, they said, in 2016 to 17, the loss of funding to Leeds schools rises to over 15.5 million per year. That's the equivalent of 380 teaching posts. A large high school, they said, would lose around 250,000, which equates to about 6 teaching posts, while a large primary will lose about 40,000 per year, which is 1 teaching post for each primary school. And they went on to estimate that nationwide the losses to school budgets would be over £1.1 billion, which is the equivalent of losing over 27,000 teachers across the country. Those are the spending cuts, and that's the impact they have on us, our members, but also on children. Teachers across the region, Leeds and the other areas that were called out earlier, Kirklees, Colverdale, Wakefield and so on, are feeling the effect of these cuts already. Lots and lots of schools we're picking up on, and you may see it too, pay progression denied, even though performance is fine. We've got schools where the cost of living increase that we get each year hasn't been paid, or hasn't been paid in full in some schools, because remember that academies have the freedom not to pay that money. Class sizes are increasing. We've had people on the radio this morning, our acting General Secretary and others, talking about class sizes increasing, and Nicky Morgan's trying to deny it. But the number of pupils in classes over 30 is now the highest that it's been in 15 years. It increased by about 100,000 pupils last year, the number of pupils in classes of over 30. So that's really happening in our schools. Teachers given additional responsibilities without being paid. All of these things are just examples of what's already happening because of the funding cuts, and we expect more of that unless we get funding restored. What makes all of that worse, of course, and this is the second element of the dispute, and makes all of that more threatening, is at the same time as those funding cuts are coming in, all the rights and protections that give us some minimum standard at work are all under threat. And they're under threat because of the forced academy agenda. Because some of you will know, some of you won't. But all of the basic rights you've got at work, or I should say the vast majority of the basic rights you've got at work, come from 2 documents which only apply by law to people who work in maintained schools. If you don't work in a maintained school, you haven't got the right to those things. You may have them because we've negotiated it with your academy head or your academy chain, but you don't have it by right. If there are no maintained schools, there won't be a single teacher in the country that has those rights by statutory protection, by legal protection. That's the risk that we face. And the climb down, I haven't got time to go into it, but Nicky Morgan's climb down on forced academies is a body swerve, not a climb down. She still intends to go for forced academies just by a different route. And that puts, if you want to know what kind of thing that puts at risk, it's your pay ranges, it's your notice periods, in other words, how long the school have got to give you before they can dismiss you for any reason, it's your PPA time, it's your paid maternity leave, it's your paid sickness leave, and it's a whole host of other things. All at risk if we go to a system where there simply are no maintained schools left and every school is an academy. And again, there isn't time to go into it, but I should remind you that also in the white paper that talks about forced academies is the end of QTS, so that all training's on the job, and the end of elected parents to governing bodies, the end of elected staff to governing bodies. This is a revolution in schools, and it's not in a direction that helps us or helps children. Now, people often say to us as a union, and they probably say to you in school, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. The NUT has solutions to these problems, and they're not difficult solutions. First of all, on funding. I heard Nicky Morgan this morning on the radio talking about it. She actually said, it seems like the NUT thinks there's a magic money tree. Now, that really struck me because there is a magic money tree, but it's not spending money in our direction. I'll give you some examples. It's been estimated by the opposition that the cost of converting all schools to academy stage is £1.1 billion. Most of that is on lawyers' fees. Very little of it is on buildings or anything to do with schools. It's on lawyers' fees for a programme that we now know doesn't magically improve standards. It isn't a magic bullet. But it's worse. Free schools. In December 2013, the National Audit Office found that £241 million had been spent on free schools in areas with no need for additional places. They also found, and this shocked me, that the DfE had spent £8 million of taxpayers' money to pay off the debts of private schools which had become free schools so that they could become free schools. They then spent another £15 million upgrading the facilities and accommodation of these private schools, which were being brought into the state sector. And DfE data also shows that at least £1.1 million has been spent on free school projects that never opened, that the schools never happened. So yes, there's a magic money tree, but it's not being spent on the schools our children are actually in and actually need. Now, today is just one part of a long campaign to say enough is enough. This is the education budget I've been talking about. This is our children's money. The NUT say stop the academy and free school programmes and spend the money on all of our schools and all of our children. And of course, we have an extra £350 million per week that was spent on the EU, which we can now use on hospitals and schools. National conditions of service. We also have, so that's the solution to that. Spend that money on school. Usually, someone like me, a trade unionist, would stand here and say, well, tax the very wealthy, borrow money. We don't even have to do that in this case, just stop spending the money that's spent on wasteful projects. But on conditions of service, we also have an answer that's nearly cost-free. We need a national contract for all teachers in all state-funded schools, whether they're in academies or maintained schools. And we need that to be a contract that's agreed with the teacher unions and the support staff unions. We need a contract that's negotiated. We need to take the current conditions we're on as an absolute bottom line, an absolute minimum, mustn't fall below that, but actually it needs to be better. Because the conditions people working now led to 50,000 teachers leaving the profession last year. The conditions we're in now mean that when people start teacher training, 5 years later, 40% of them aren't in a classroom anymore. I would urge people here, and if you've been at a strike rally before, you've probably heard me or others say this before, try to avoid using the term teacher shortage. We don't have a shortage of qualified teachers in this country. We have a shortage of teachers willing to stay in the classroom. They're stacking shelves in Sainsbury's, they're doing other jobs, they're not teaching because they want a life, and we want to stop that happening. Teaching should be a life. Just want the current contract, we want better. We want a real enforceable limit on the hours that teachers work. We need an end to performance-rated pay and the crazy and pointless system of testing that goes alongside it, the league tables, the data crunching and all the rest of it. These things would make teaching better. These things would make more people stay. That means they would make schools better places for children too. Our working conditions are children's learning conditions. That's one of the most important slogans we can repeat. Now, just to finish, following on from today, Yes. These things would make schools better for children because, as I said earlier, children need happy, motivated, inspiring teachers who plan to stay in the job, not exhausted, demoralised robots who are searching for a way out. We have exam factories where we need schools. We have Stepford teachers where we need dedicated, trusted educators. We should be lighting fires on our pupils' minds instead were filling their heads with tests.